Hey, I'm Chris from Make Everything, and today we're going to do our best to try to save a flooded piece of equipment. Check it out.
So the first thing you would do when, trying to make sure a motorized machine like this is working is pull it over and see what happens. Well, I can't actually get the crank to crank at all. So the next step is to see what's going on inside the cylinder head by taking off the spark plug. Not a good sign. Not good. So the reason that this thing even made it onto my bench was because a couple of years ago I bought this at an auction, and when I got it, it had no fuel in it, and it looked like it was running. It had good compression, I could pull the pull starter, and then it sat outside for a little while, and then last year, if you watch my videos, you know I had a really bad flood.
Look at that water. Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Now this equipment was outside, but I figured since, it's essentially an air-sealed piece of equipment, it probably didn't get too much water in it. My friend Matt told me to check the oil. I did. It looked fine. And now I needed to compact some soil at the property upstate, so I decided to give it a shot. That's when I realized the pull starter wouldn't pull, and now I can see that there's just water in the piston head. So let's take the motor apart, let's get the covers off, and let's see if we can save this thing.
So I have some experience with small engines like this, and they're all very similar. This one happens to have a Honda motor on it, so basically all it is a Honda motor with a clutch-style pulley that pulls a eccentric bearing with a weight in it. So this is, a plate compactor, so that mass on the front underneath that plastic tank has a weight in it, and as it's rotating, it vibrates. The base plate is heavy, so it helps you compact soil. These are really useful to have, and renting them adds up, so having my own is going to be great. I take the original motor off, and by doing that I just unbolted some things in the bottom, and I can get the frame off of it. Now I'm going to address the frame later, but in the meantime I got the motor back up on this lift table, and I can start looking through it. Now, like I said, when I got it, this thing definitely pulled over. I wouldn't have bought it if it was seized, so I'm sure whatever damage happened to it happened as a result of the water. But the first thing I'm going to do is pull that pulley off, the sort of flywheel pulley, using a gear puller, and that's going to allow me to get access to the side cover and just help me get to the carburetor and the exhaust a little bit easier. Now, there's a lot of debris, grease, and rust all over this thing, which doesn't really give me too much confidence in its ability to survive. But, these motors are pretty hardy, and they can be rebuilt. So as I take it apart, I'm hopeful for what I'm going to find. But then I take off the exhaust.
That's not good. That's not good.
I pull off the carburetor, and while it does look okay, there's a lot of shmoo in it. Pulling off some of these other bolts and trying to get to the top end of the cylinder, I take apart the overhead valve, and then I can get the last two screws out.
Oh my God.
So water got in probably through the exhaust port and totally, just sat in the piston. This thing has been sitting after the water got in it for quite some time. I brought it in the shop, said I was going to fix it, and I just never got to it. So my goal here is to try to get the piston freed up so I can at least get it to rotate. And I'm just sort of forcing it back in to try to break the seal of whatever that, rust and corrosion is. And eventually, by working it back and forth a little bit between the pull starter and giving it a couple knocks with a wooden block, I am able to get it free, which is going to allow me to at least get some amount of compression out of it. So getting some sort of movement and knowing that I'll probably get a little bit of compression made me hopeful. And, now I can kind of continue to clean it up and sort of just get it back together. I could go ahead and take the bottom end off, but I figured I would at least try to do this sort of partial tear down, clean things up and put them back together and see what I get out of it. I'm not super confident in the seal that I'm getting out of that piston and the piston ring. And after looking it up, I did do a little bit of research as to, having I could have the cylinder honed, I could get new rings for it, but I don't really know what else is going on. So my goal here is to just clean up the carb, clean up the overhead valve a little bit, and then put this thing back together and see if I can just get it to kick over. New motors, when you have a Honda motor like this, there are a lot of clone motors that you can buy that essentially have the same bolt pattern and the same size shaft so that you can really quickly replace these if one of them does go bad. Now, if I was going to buy a new motor, I probably wouldn't buy a Honda just because they are so much more expensive than some of the import motors, but it's nice to know that if you wind up with a piece of equipment that you buy used and the motor is bad, it's pretty easy to go ahead and get a new one, if the situation arises. I clean the exhaust port and get everything back together, get the carburetor on there, get the fuel tank reattached, and then I can bring it outside, put a little bit of fuel in it, and see if I can get it to start. Now, the thing has great spark. I did check the spark off the spark plug by pulling it. Great spark. I lit a little bit of carburetor cleaner on fire with it. But pulling it over, I can already feel it doesn't have a lot of compression. I throw my compression tester on it, give it a few pulls, and the max I'll get out of it is about 30 psi. Now, that's not going to be enough for this thing to run. And after doing some research, I decided I'm just going to scrap the motor. And while I wait for a new motor to arrive, I'm going to do some work on the frame and clean the rest of this thing up. So on this project, I'm using the Gear Wrench 232-piece mechanics toolkit. What I really like about this is that it's all self-contained. So it's got 3 drawers with different sockets in standard and metric, Torx, some impact sockets, a screwdriver, and then it's got 90-tooth ratcheting, open-end wrenches here in the top. When I'm kind of running around doing projects, it's nice to be able to grab like a drawer of sockets and pull it right out versus having to go over to my big toolbox. And then when I'm ready to go upstate or onto a site, I can just close it up. Everything stays self-contained and everything's in there. So if you're interested in one of these, if you're looking for kind of a one-and-done toolkit that you can either bring on site or work around your shop with, check out the link in the description. Thank you to Home Depot and Gear Wrench for supplying this and supporting the channel. Now, I did take the cover off the side of the eccentric bearing. It did remain sealed. There's not really any water in there. It's got a good amount of grease, but I did notice that the water dripper was not working correctly. So that plastic tank on the front feeds down to an aluminum tube with some little holes in it. And the idea is that you fill that with water, and not only does it add a little bit of weight to the tamper, but it also allows water to drip down while you're tamping to keep dust to a minimum. So I have this thing hooked up to my chain hoist on this beam outside because that plate's pretty heavy, and I can start to diagnose what's going on with the water dripper. I'm blasting air through it and a little bit of water, and I realize if I roll it over kind of backwards, I can get my torch cleaning tools in there, and I can clean out all those little orifices. They have just cement dust and stuff in them, so I kind of blast them in both directions, try to get the same amount of air coming out of all those little holes. And, they're likely to clog up again, but after kind of doing this once, I realize it's not that bad to clean them out and get it going. The bottom of this thing is pretty rusty, so I just did a quick wire wheel on it while I had it up on its side and blow it off with the air compressor as I'm going. It's going to sit outside, and it's definitely going to get rusty again, but getting a little bit of that surface rust off doesn't hurt. Now, I want to paint the top of this to keep it from getting pitted, so I go through it with a cup wire wheel, and I get the majority of the rust and corrosion off of it, blow it off with some air and try to get the dust out of there. I'm not going to replace the rubber isolators because they're actually in really good shape. They're not cracked or anything, so I know that this thing will function well once it's all cleaned up. I scrape some of the grease off of the bottom of the frame and then I go ahead and disassemble it a little bit further. I'm going to be repainting it sort of a yellow-orange and just trying to make the whole thing look a little bit cleaner and new, especially if it's getting a new motor. I want the machine to look new and run well, not be sort of an eyesore. You can see it's definitely seen some work in its life, and the frame's losing a bunch of paint over on the handle, but again, no big deal to pull this thing apart and get it cleaned up. While I was doing that, I threw some black paint, some Rust-Oleum on the frame, and then I can paint the base plate, I can paint the mount, and everything that I'm going to need is going to get painted black. I picked up some of this super yellow industrial paint and kind of used it as a primer coat because I hated the color, and then repainted it with an orange that I had kicking around in the shop. The yellow was just a little bit too much, and I thought it would look bad with the sort of orangey yellow tank, and I didn't want to paint that because I figured all it would do is flake off. Once the paint had dried, I bring the base plate back inside and I can start the reassembly process. Now I'm using this little manual Presto jack. It's really great for heavy stuff like this. The table's not that big, but it definitely makes lifting heavy things up and down a lot easier, and it gets to a nice working height. We've got the new motor here. It's a 212cc horizontal shaft motor, and the only issue that I have with it is that the shaft is a little bit smaller than the shaft on the Honda. So I do a little alignment to make sure that I can know where I need to bolt the motor to the base plate, and then I get it bolted on there. I bolted the motor on off of the actual plate of the tamper because it was pretty difficult to get it off, and I just thought I'd get a better job out of it if I did it separate. And then I put the 4 bolts onto the isolators before I put the belt cover on. Now, having the pulley be a slightly different diameter is not ideal, but I was able to use some brass shim stock, and I was able to get a really nice fit over on the motor pulley by shimming around the keyway and then getting a nice interference fit and keeping my shaft well aligned. Now I have to add some washers because the shaft length is actually a little bit longer on the new motor. So I add some heavy duty, like 3/4 inch washers, and then a grade 8 retaining bolt and a lock nut lock washer so that I can make sure that thing stays on. I was able to keep pretty good tension on that belt where I mounted it, but I could always readjust it by sliding the motor back a little bit. Now that's done, I'm able to bolt the water housing frame back on, and everything sort of just bolts back together. Before I do though, I want to get the original company's logo off the front, just kind of clean it up. A little bit of acetone goes a long way, cleans up this tank, and just makes it look a little fresher. I reconnect the water line knowing that everything's going to work in terms of the drip housing, and then I can put these bolts back in to keep it all together. Now I also have to add back the frame, which allows you to fold the other handle back over. So this frame kind of helps retain the water tank and also acts as a little stopper for the handle when it folds forward. And I'm just go ahead and reuse all the original bolts. That's the nice thing about this machine. Even though the motor did wind up getting trashed, all the original bolts were good, and I think the orange paint came out pretty cool. Bolt everything back together. Everything has nylon lock nuts, which is essential for a machine that's literally going to vibrate itself apart. And once that's all done, I can fill this motor up with some oil. This motor came without any oil in it, so I've got to take care of that. But before I do, I'm going to throw the belt cover back on, which is just going to keep the belt from, kind of getting debris and stuff on it. This is a Benford. I don't know much about the brand, but it seems to be very typical of a standard plate compactor. There's a lot of brands that make ones that look exactly the same. This gets 1/2 quart of oil, so I throw some 1040 in there, which is what the manual called for, and let that make sure it's filled, check it with the dipstick, and then after I run it a little while, I'll check the oil again, probably drain it, and reinstall. Now that's done, I can get this thing outside, throw a little gasoline in it, and give it its first start. Now since this is a brand new motor, it's actually got to break in a little bit, so I can't go full throttle, but I am able to get it to start, and I can adjust the throttle, and once I get to about 1/2 throttle, that eccentric bearing engages the clutch, and it really allows the thing to kind of take off on its own, and actually has a good amount of its own momentum, which is awesome. It's going to make using it really easy. It wants to move forward, which is going to basically be self-propelled, and it does a great job running around on the gravel. So once that motor breaks in, it'll be that much better. I'm also able to check the water flow, filled it up, and you can see it dripping out of all those holes, which is going to be awesome when I'm working in a dusty environment, keep the dust down, and also add a little bit of weight. Overall, I'm super happy with how it came out. It's a little unfortunate that I had to lose the original motor, but now at least I have a functional machine that I think will last me a really long time. All right, so that about does it for this video. So didn't go exactly how I planned. I really did think I could get that motor running, and I did that kind of quick disassembly, reassembly once I realized how much compression it had, and I started doing some research as to how I could rebuild it. This motor, brand new, no hours on it was $130. To rebuild that with time would have probably cost twice as much. So I think it was the right thing to do. And I did get a little experience pulling apart that motor. This is basically a clone of that same motor, so it's kind of a similar experience. But either way, I think that this thing cleaned up really nice. I had bought this because I was planning on doing a bunch of work at my property upstate with it, and then I wound up having an excavator do it, but still there is a need for this, even around here at the shop. I have some kind of like deeper sections of gravel, and they kind of come loose, and then the forklift gets stuck. So one way or another, having a plate tamper like this is going to be super useful. So it was a fun project. I always like fixing up gas equipment and making sure that I have tools that I can use on projects coming up. So a big thank you to Home Depot and Gear Wrench for sending me that awesome toolkit. If you're interested in like kind of a one and done toolkit, like I said, that thing has been great. I've been bringing it upstate with me. I keep it in the truck. It's perfect for a project like this where you're going to need a bunch of different sockets and metric and standard and open-ended wrenches and all those different things. You just put it on the bench, put it on the floor, and you've got everything you need right at your fingertips. So something like that is great to have in a shop, even a shop like mine where I've got toolboxes filled with sockets and wrenches. It's nice to be able to bring the tools to the project instead of having to bring the project to the tools. So check out a link in the description of this video to check that out and get yourself one of those if you're looking for a good toolkit. If you want to see what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis here at the shop, follow me right here at Make Everything Shop on Instagram. If you have any comments or questions about this project, leave them down below in the comments. Give this video a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more videos like this, more videos in the shop. Got a bunch of cool welding and woodworking projects coming up, and I hope you're there to watch them. Again, I'm Chris F. from Make Everything. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.